first of all, thank you so much for making time for this. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. And as I was telling them, I've been wanting to do this interview for about 30 years now. So the message is just hang on for about 28 years and you too may get a chance to interview one of your childhood heroes. So very excited for this one. And I really appreciate you making time for this.
It's so weird. I watch some of your videos, and every time I go to YouTube, there's like your YouTube feed. There's always one of your videos in my YouTube feed. And I'm always like, what did cause emo to die? Click. What is the secret history of AFI? Click.
Now you know.
So I watch your videos. You got a great show. It's awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you've probably seen I've got quite a few today, flyers and stuff up on my wall there.
I've noticed. Yeah. Cool.
Well, I've got a lot of questions, but I guess for anybody who may not be familiar, what are you, or I guess for me, I don't even know what all you do these days. What are you up to these days?
I am mostly a yoga teacher. I'm also a freelance graphic designer, which is kind of like my side hustle to make ends meet. But I mostly do yoga. And, before the lockdown and the pandemic and everything, I was traveling, teaching, doing workshops, doing retreats. And so it's been tough for the past couple of years because all that stopped, and now it's kind of stopped again. I was actually supposed to be in Colombia, but I couldn't go because I'm not vaccinated. So it's kind of rough. But, getting by and, mostly just kind of sitting in my apartment in freezing cold upstate New York. But yeah, it's been good. I do music. Youth of Today just played punk rock bowling. That was really fun with the Descendants and Devo, one of my favorite bands.
Oh, wow.
Devo. So we do get to play every now and then. We do play pretty often, but, just with the last couple of years, we only played a couple of shows.
Right.
But we're going on tour in June and July. We're going to be in Europe. Youth Today is, and we're booking some shelter shows, and I'm working on a new band. So that's been taking up a lot of my time, actually. I've been working on a new band for like a year.
Cool. Can you tell us anything about that?
It's melodic hardcore. Very melodic hardcore. We started a new genre called hardcore pop.
Okay.
It's fast, it's thrash. It's kind of like, it's got a girl singer, which is, it's sort of like Dag Nasty-ish, later era 7 Seconds-ish. But because it's got a girl singer who can really sing really well, it kind of pushes it more into that, pop vein. But it's really good, exciting, inspiring music. I'm really into it. So that should be out in 2022 sometime.
Cool. I'll be excited to hear that. Well, just to kind of give some context for, any of the younger folks, to me anyway, and, Youth of Today is even a little bit before my time, not by much, but a little bit. I consider Youth of Today to be the band that really kind of laid the foundation for what, the template for what hardcore is now, as far as the way that it sounds and looks. And like, if people think of hardcore now, it's like Youth of Today laid that foundation to me. But from what I understand from hearing you guys tell stories and stuff of the old days, say like 1984, 85, and you guys kind of first started to come on the scene in New York City, it sounds like the hardcore scene back then, the sort of Lower East Side kind of scene, was very, very, very different world. And what you guys were doing was just a complete shock to the system. Can you kind of set the stage for people and tell them a little bit about that and what the reception was to what you guys were doing?
Well, it's hard to believe, but when we first started, there wasn't a straight edge scene. There wasn't a straight edge scene when Minor Threat were together. There wasn't a straight edge scene when SSD and, some of these seminal straight edge bands. There wasn't really like a scene like we have now with, thousands of straight edge kids and straight edge bands. And it's almost like straight edge has become a genre in itself. But it wasn't like that back then. It was, there was certain pockets of kids that were into straight edge, but it was few and far between, and Minor Threat had broken up. And, it wasn't even like Minor Threat push the straight edge thing. The whole band wasn't straight edge. It was just kind of like a song and an idea. They kind of downplayed it. So, Youth of Today, we had the idea when we started that we wanted to be like a full on straight edge band, get all the members be straight edge. And it was something that was, in our own kind of teenage way, it was something that was very near and dear to our hearts, because we would go to shows in New York City. And if you go to the Lower East Side in New York City now, there's like the Gap and Starbucks and supermodels sunbathing in Tompkins Square Park. But, back in 1985, 1986, it was terrible.
It looks like a literal war zone if you watch videos from back then.
If you could have seen Tompkins Square Park, it was nothing but homeless, like tents and people doing drugs, and not even like smoking pot. It's like people smoking crack and shooting heroin. And, it was really bad. It was really dangerous. And we just, we always, I lived in upstate New York. Ray lived in Connecticut. And we were obsessed with New York hardcore. Like, we loved Agnostic Front. We loved the Cro-Mags. We loved Warzone. And as little kids, we would kind of go down to CBGB's and we'd go to those legendary matinees. But man, let me tell you, CBGB's was a messed up place. You talk to anybody from back then, nobody was straight edge, tons of drugs, tons of hard drugs. I remember the first time we played CBGB's, there was this guy that booked the shows. His name was Johnny Stiff. And we were backstage at that crappy little backstage of CBGB's. We were putting X's on our hands, and he walked back and he'd have set up the show for us. He's like, "Are you guys crazy? You're going to go out there with X's on your hands? New York is never going to be straight edge. It's never, ever going to be straight edge. Drugs just are too embedded in this scene." And it was really weird, because a few months later, there's like a huge straight edge scene in New York. And, Ray B's from Warzone became straight edge. And I remember the first time I saw Ray B's with X's on his hands. He was walking down the Bowery with a huge boombox with an X on his hands, playing 7 Seconds. I was like, am I in some alternate reality right now? Because 2 weeks later, he was smoking dust in the basement of CBGB's. And then he went all posse straight edge. So it was an interesting time, because it was sort of a bold move on our part to kind of, jump into that scene and, talk about things that weren't accepted and weren't popular at the time. And I think it kind of paid off, because a lot of kids were into it.
And I mean, whatever, 40 years later now, or whatever it is, which is horrifying to say, but, here we are, between Youth of Today and the other bands that you've done and Shelter and stuff. I mean, you really did change the world in some way, which is pretty amazing. There's tens of thousands of people all over the world who are into straight edge, however many people that you expose to Krishna Consciousness and stuff. I mean, it's pretty amazing.
Well, we were always a band on a mission. Youth of Today wasn't just a band. We were literally out to change the world. We were 18-year-old kids. And, I think youth means, you have some youthful idealism. Like, young people, they look out in the world, they look at their parents, they look at the way the world is. They're like, I don't like this. I don't want to grow up in a world that's like this. I want to change things. I think, most young kids are like that. And we were also like that. We even looked at our little microcosm of world. Look at the punk scene. It's violent. It's filled with drugs. It's negative. It's nihilistic. We didn't want to be like that. We were more positive, straight edge, into clean living, into healthy living, into progressive living. We weren't into racism. We weren't into sexism. And I think it was just the kind of breath of fresh air that the scene needed, because I think a lot of kids felt that way. A lot of kids felt like the world's fucked up. And now I got into punk rock to get away from that. And punk rock's just more fucked up than the world. And, we set out to kind of make a change and change the way that, the scene was, and change. And most importantly, it was like we wanted to change the way we were. We wanted to live a different lifestyle. We became vegetarian, which was pretty kind of crazy in the scene and in the world back then. I mean, vegetarian is so mainstream now.
Yeah.
But in the 80s, I mean, you probably remember, even in the 90s.
Sure. I remember going to those dusty food co-ops and stuff with my mom when I was a kid, and now you go to fucking Subway and they've got vegan stuff on the menu.
Yeah, right near CBGB's, a few blocks away from CBGB's, there's a gigantic Whole Foods that takes up like one city block. And if you had told me when I was a vegetarian in like 1987 that there was going to be a health food store as big as a city block with tons of vegetarian food right near CBGB's, I couldn't have even imagined it. And so a lot of these ideas that we had when we were like little kids, they slowly but surely crept into the mainstream. And, I really have to hand it to bands like Earth Crisis, in the early 90s when they were vegan and everybody thought that they were nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And they just kind of kept on chugging along and, they really believed in it. And look at it now. You can get a vegan burger at Burger King, So I think the hardcore scene was actually pretty switched on and pretty into these, progressive ideas way before they, became popular, which was kind of cool to see.
I think about the people, that, and I'm not putting them down for this. I think it's great, but that discovered the Columbus Day as genocide thing like 3 years ago. And it's like, man, remember abnegation and stuff talking about that in like 1992.
Or, the dead Kennedys talking about war for oil and things like that in the early 80s. And now it's just kind of, common knowledge.
Right.
I remember when the first hardcore band I ever saw was MDC. Do you remember that band?
Of course. I love them.
Millions of Dead Cops. What a great name.
So topical. I mean, the stuff that they were talking about in 1980 could have come out 6 months ago and it would have sounded completely modern and contemporary.
Well, I tell you, they were the first show that I saw because, I was a little kid. I was like 14 years old from the suburbs of, New York City. I lived in Westchester. So if you know Westchester, it's all kind of like rich kids and, like really, really nice suburbs. So I couldn't go to shows. The shows were they started really late. You couldn't take the train back after like 11 o'clock or something. But MDC played a matinee show in Central Park. So I went. And I think I was either 14 or 15. And the singer for MDC, it was the first hardcore show I ever saw. And I was so amazed that people were like moshing, because I had heard of moshing, but I never went to a show. You see stage diving on TV and stuff. And I remember seeing Fear on Saturday Night Live and people were stage diving and just being amazed by it. And so people were stage diving and people were moshing. But what really gripped me about that show and what really separates hardcore from any other genre of music is that the singer was up on stage, Dave, and he was saying all this stuff about vegetarianism. And he was saying all about how, McDonald's is ruining the environment. They cut down the rainforest for cheap grazing land for cattle, all this stuff that's like, people are just starting to learn about now. He was saying this, literally like you're saying in the early 80s. And he was saying how eating meat wasn't healthy and it causes heart disease and it causes heart attacks. And what kind of music are you going to go see? And the singer is just like professing ideas between songs of stuff that he really believes in. And he's
talking
really
about cross-dressing too.
Another
thing that zero people were talking about that in the 80s.
Yeah. I mean, it was amazing. But, I remember, the vegetarian thing. It was like that show, it really planted a seed in my mind because he was saying so much about vegetarianism and how, the brutality of the slaughterhouses. I'm a freaking 14-year-old kid. I never even fathom this stuff before. You know what? My parents would throw a hamburger in front of on my plate and I would eat it. I wouldn't think twice about it. And I thought that was so cool. Like that was such the power of music especially punk rock and hardcore, because it brought all these new ideas, to the table. And there was a lot of like discussion and debate, and it was really, really cool. It was very, very magical, I thought. And so Youth of Today, we wanted to do that too. We wanted to bring our ideas to the table about clean living and straight edge. And, some people liked it, some people didn't, but it was kind of cool because the hardcore scene was this big melting pot of ideas. And yeah, so that, to me, that's the magic of music, that you listen to music and it kind of changes your idea about life. And, all my favorite bands, from Minor Threat, to 7 Seconds, even to bands like the Cro-Mags, they did that for me. They sort of gave me a new map to navigate my life with. And that was really important to me. And that was something that I wanted to pay forward in all the bands that I did, when I started playing music.
Well, the main thing I wanted to talk about with you is, since I got the, compilation of War on Illusion, which for those who aren't familiar, that was the zine you did for a few years back in the 90s, which I loved. I had that in high school and it was super influential on me. And so I really wanted to kind of talk about some of those ideas and about the Krishna consciousness side of things. I discovered Youth of Today, I think I was 13 or 14. And then I had a friend who was a couple years older than me that was actually a devotee, one of the first people I knew that was into that. And he was like, "Oh, you like Youth of Today? You should check out Shelter." I was like, "Oh, okay." And Shelter instantly made sense to me in a way that I feel like I was like some sort of a very weird combination. My mom, you're familiar with Yogananda, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. My mom was really into Yogananda. And so I was already, of course, I thought it was stupid because my mom was into it, but I was familiar with a lot of these ideas because of her. And so I was like, these ideas felt familiar to me. And I was like, oh, there's a hardcore band that's like talking about all that like shit that Yogananda talks about. Like, this makes total sense to me. I get it. And I like just instantly loved it. And, we were talking about before this, I was playing some of the sermon track from the end of which one is that from?
There was a class. There was a Gita class on both Quest for Certainty and Attaining the Supreme. It was they were both hidden tracks on the CDs.
Yeah, so I remember it's the one where he's talking about Dharma and stuff. And I remember hearing that, whatever it was, when I was like 14, 15 years old, whatever it was. I still talk about that sermon all the time. Like, I was talking about it with my wife like last night, in relation to something else. And like the ideas that you guys were conveying, which, were not necessarily your ideas, but the ideas that you guys were conveying to me are so powerful that I hope that anybody listening to this just takes away a sliver of that, because like legitimately changed my life. I mean, I've never been religious, but the core principles that you guys were talking about in all those songs really legitimately changed my life. And I would not be the person that I am now without that. Can you talk about, I guess, what is Krishna consciousness for anybody who's not familiar?
Krishna consciousness is just a name. It was kind of like a Western term that came up for basically the path of bhakti. So if you study yoga, there's different paths of yoga, but they're not actually like separate paths. Like, you'll hear karma, you'll hear jnana, you'll hear hatha yoga, which is the path of physical yoga. So karma means activity, jnana means intelligence or study. And then you'll have hatha yoga, which means the physical yoga practice, the up dogs, the down dogs. And then you'll hear of this path that's called bhakti, which means sometimes it's called the yoga of the heart or the yoga of devotion. And that's basically what Krishna consciousness is. It's the bhakti thread of yoga. But some people have a misconception that, if you're intelligent, you follow jnana. If you are an active person, you take the path of karma. If you are an emotional, heartfelt person, you take this path of bhakti. But it's not actually like that. If you really read this yoga literature from India, it's more like a ladder. And bhakti is at the top. Bhakti is like the highest destination of your yoga path. And it starts out with karma. It starts out with the idea that, basically the bottom rung of the ladder is I'm a materialist. I'm full on into matter. I think that making money and having a really nice car and having a pretty girlfriend on my arm to impress everybody, that's going to make me happy. And I'll step over anybody that I need to step over to get what I want. That's like the bottom rung of the ladder. You are a materialist, you're selfish, you're narcissistic. A little higher than that, the next rung on the ladder is karma, where you start to realize that, my activities that I perform, they have a ripple effect in the world. And some of the things that I'm doing to get ahead, they're causing suffering to other people. And according to this law of nature of karma, if I'm doing things that are causing distress and suffering to other people, I'm going to have to get that same energy back to me. And so you start to realize how the world works and how the energy, how the subtle energies of the world work. And you stop doing things that are harmful to other people. And then the next rung of the ladder is jnana. That's when you start to really contemplate, are these things that I'm busting my ass over really going to make me happy? Like, am I going to be any happier if I have $1 million in my bank account, or if I just have $100,000? Like, does money even cause happiness? Or other things in jnana. You know what? I'm going to die one day. Like, this life is temporary. Like, I'm living life, I'm going through life almost like I'm in a canoe and I'm about to go over Niagara Falls. And I'm just got my head stuck in the sand. I'm totally ignoring that fact. Life is temporary. Life is filled with suffering. Life is, has all these inherent problems: birth, death, old age, disease. So you start to get a little bit more philosophical. And that's the next rung up. That's jnana. That's even higher than karma. And then above that is the path of bhakti. Once you start to figure out that I'm actually not the body, but I'm a spirit soul that's inside of the body. I'm like a spark of consciousness and energy that's inside of this body that animates the body. And this body's temporary. I can see I'm changing bodies throughout this lifetime. I was in a kid body. I was in a punk rock teenager body. I was in a middle-aged man body. But there's a consciousness inside that's like a witness to all the different bodies that I'm passing through. There's something eternal and unchanging, even though the world around me and even my own body is constantly in flux. So there's an eternal spirit soul. Where does that come from? It comes from a supreme divine source. This is what the yoga literature tells us. Books like Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, all these classics of Indian literature. They say that there's one divine source that everything material and spiritual comes from. And just like we have personality, that source isn't just like a gas or a ball of energy or the force. Those things are true. There is an all expansive energy that connects us all. But ultimately behind that is a person. Like, it's a real kind of interesting theory that the source of everything has personality, and you have a relationship with that supreme being. And that supreme being, when you turn your face back to that supreme being reaches through space and time and interjects in your life and starts to make all these arrangements in your life for your own spiritual evolution. You'll find books. You'll find teachers. You'll listen to a Shelter record with this weird class at the end of the CD, and it starts to make sense to you. And it starts to push you forward on this path. According to the path of bhakti, life isn't really meant for material upliftment. Life is really meant for spiritual upliftment. And I think a lot of people find, and when I first started getting into Krishna consciousness and, bhakti and yoga and Bhagavad Gita and all this stuff, it made a lot of sense to me, because a lot of people have this thing that I'm going to be really happy if only
blank.
This happens.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a musician right now. If I can somehow get in a band and like go on tour, then I'm going to be happy. Like, I don't have any money now, but if I can somehow work hard and make a lot of money, then I'm going to be happy. But a lot of people, they work really hard, but they don't actually achieve that goal. But they still have that dream in their mind that once I get there, then I'm going to be happy. But when I was a kid, it was almost like all my dreams came true. Like, I was so into music and into like, punk rock and hardcore when I was like really young, like 11, 12 years old. All I wanted to do was be in a band. All I wanted to do was play music. I was like obsessed with music, obsessed with playing guitar. And then I turned 18 and we started this band Youth of Today. And it was just like, bam, things just started unfolding. The band kept on getting bigger and bigger. And we're playing these shows. We're going on tour, and we're going on tour in Europe, which was unheard of.
Right.
And even later on, when I was playing in Shelter, we're playing festival shows to 100,000 people.
On MTV and all that.
We're on MTV. We're doing, U.S. tours with arena tours with No Doubt. It's just like all those things that I wanted, I got, and I realized, you know what, this isn't the goal of life. This isn't what's going to really make me happy. It's not about fame. It's not about money. It's not about followers. It's not about strength or beauty. Those things are so shallow. If you really want to find true happiness, you got to go way deeper. And that is a spiritual quest. So really, that's what Krishna Consciousness is about. It's the search for God and your connection with God.
The quest for certainty.
It's the quest for certainty in an uncertain world where everything's changing and death's at the end. What is that eternal thing that I can hold on to? And for some reason, when I was a young kid, when I was getting into it, it grabbed me. It just grabbed me, and I was just fascinated by it. And that's how Shelter came about. And it's really cool because the hardcore scene is at least 20 years in front of mainstream culture.
Yep.
Back when Shelter started, things like meditation were so weird. Like, if you meditated,
you're crazy.
You were crazy. Now any doctor is going to tell you, yeah, you've got high blood pressure, you should meditate.
Right.
And even things like yoga.
You should be vegetarian and meditate and do yoga.
Yeah, it's basically what Shelter was telling everybody about.
Right.
But yeah,
but yet at the same time, there is a lot of, there's so much materialism in hardcore, and so much, hardcore gets lost in the bullshit, just like mainstream society does too, with ego and beefs and gossip and collecting vinyl and all that other shit. That there's plenty of that stuff in hardcore too. Having the right sneakers. Exactly. And of course, I've been guilty of all that stuff as just as much as anybody. But that's the thing that really always stood out to me about Shelter and other bands like Downset and 108 and stuff too, is just like that. There's truth to the things that you guys were saying that just has continued to be true for my whole life. There's a lot of stuff that I look back on, from, the 80s and 90s and stuff where I'm like, yeah, that was cool, but this part of it didn't hold up. But the stuff that you guys said, 30 years ago is more true to me than ever. And I think that says a lot about the way that you guys express those ideas. Well, the Bhagavad Gita was written 5,000 years ago. And you can pick up that book in 2022 and read it. And it's almost like it has more relevance now than it probably had 5,000 years ago, because we live in such a materialistic culture. Right. And like, take a song like Photographs Lie. Like, that song could be about fucking TikTok or Instagram today. Yeah, I never thought about that. I read the lyrics a while ago. I was like, holy shit. Like, this is more relevant than ever. And to top it off, Kappa is just a great lyric writer. I mean, I got to give props to that guy. He wrote some really, really great, thoughtful lyrics that were way ahead of his time. So Shelter had some really kind of cool songs. I'm really proud of that band and proud of everything we did. Yeah.
We're actually going to work on another record too.
Oh, wow.
We're going to do one last record. It's going to be great. We're going to work on it this year.
Any concrete plans for that yet, or?
Well, right now I'm finishing up this band that I'm doing, and we have 6 songs recorded. We just tracked 7 more that I have to do guitar tracks for, and we have to track the vocals and mix them. But the day that I finish that, then I'm going to start working on some Shelter stuff.
I'm excited. Well, with all of that being said, I'm sure over the years that you've been doing this, your beliefs have evolved to some extent. How have you changed your perspective on things, since the early days of Shelter?
Well, I got to say that when you're young, you're idealistic, just like we were talking about before. And that idealism can sometimes manifest in intolerance. You take like a young, kind of green, straight edge kid. He gets into straight edge. It's a good idea. It's affecting his life. It's uplifting his life. He used to get drunk every weekend, was clouded in a dust storm of intoxication. And then he goes straight edge and his life immediately improves. So he starts to really like point the finger at other people that drink, like, you're bad. Look at how fallen you are. Look at how stupid you are. You drink. I don't. I'm better than you. There's that trap that anybody can really fall into. And especially even with things like a spiritual path, it's meant to uplift you, but if you're using it sort of in the service of your false ego, where you start to think you're better than other people and you start to look down on other people, then you're not making progress. You're actually going backwards. So I think there was some of that youthful idealism, with Shelter, where it was like, we have the truth. And we're going to go around, spread the truth, and all these people are in Maya, they're an illusion. Now I'm just, now I'm realizing that, I just want to really work on myself. Like I really, if I'm not so much of like a preacher anymore, you know what I mean? Like Shelter, we were like a bunch of like people out there, like, we would have knocked door to door with the Bhagavad Gita and like, the Mormons or whatever. We would have done that. We were so into it. But nowadays, I just like to work on myself. And I think when people see that you've made significant changes in your life, that's the only kind of quote unquote preaching you have to do, because people see, wow, look at this guy. He made this change. He made that change. He's doing so good. He's much happier in life. Maybe I should be like that. And I think that's like, nowadays, that's more of like what I'm into, just trying to be like a really good example. And I don't really, I'm a yoga teacher. So luckily for me, the yoga scene attracts people that are sort of seekers, you know what I mean? And they want to know about this stuff. So when people ask me about all this stuff, that I've been studying for 30 years or, 20 something years, I'm more than happy to, tell them what I've learned or, help them kind of understand the Bhagavad Gita or any of these books that I've studied for a long time. But it's not like I'm trying to push it on anybody. And I'm way more comfortable that way. And it still seems that somehow or other, a lot of people are kind of, coming up to me, through yoga and getting really inspired by bhakti and the more spiritual side of yoga as opposed to just the physical side of yoga, which was pretty much what yoga was in America, 10 years ago. But I think that with the popularity of yoga being so big, it's literally the fastest growing fitness modality in the world. Like even more than CrossFit, like yoga is rising in popularity every year. So I think there's always going to be a small subset of those people that they want to know what the spirituality behind the physical practice is. And, your vibe attracts your tribe. So I kind of teach that way. So somehow or other, people that are looking for that, they come to my classes.
You mentioned sort of looking down on other people. I certainly did some of that when I was younger too. And I think about, like going to punk shows and stuff and like, oh, look at all these fucking losers that are getting drunk and blah, blah, blah. And what I didn't understand when I was younger, like empathy has been the biggest like growth point for me, is like, well, yeah, it's sad that they're like drinking and smoking angel dust and whatnot, especially, you think about those people back in those Lower East Side shows back in the day. Well, why? Why was this person living in a burned out van in Tompkins Square Park smoking crack? It's probably because they went through some pretty serious shit when they were a kid, and empathy and being able to just look through someone else's eyes is the thing that I really have, I think, found as I'm older.
Yeah, exactly the same with me. Like instead of pointing a finger, I would rather reach a hand out to help somebody. You know what I mean? Like Youth of Today had one line for a song. It was the first song that we wrote. Live fast, die young was just a fad for fucking losers that didn't care.
Which I loved when I was 15. I loved it.
It had some sort of like, energy to it that, people could relate to, but that's not my attitude these days.
Right.
If there was a homeless person or a person that was on drugs, I'd be like, what can I do to serve you and help you? And, that's more my mood these days than to write a song, against their lifestyle.
Right. You think it's easy to think that leadership is telling other people what to do, but it's really helping them. That's real leadership, service.
That's true. Yeah. And, that's one of the main tenets of Bhakti Yoga also, is it's not about what I can take. What I can take is not going to make you happy. It's just going to make you selfish and narcissistic and unhappy, actually. Life isn't about what you can take and what you can get. Life is about what you can give. And so, when you're on this path of yoga, every day you're out there. Sometimes you live up to the mark. Sometimes you don't, but you have that in your mind that, I want to live like a purpose-driven life. I'm only here for a few short years. What can I do to contribute? And, that's always been my mindset.
What was it like in, sort of the peak of shelter, in the 90s, or having people, and you guys were still pretty young, you seemed so much older to me then because I was a teenager, but you guys were in your 20s then, what's it like being in your 20s and having people, put you on this pedestal as some sort of like, I don't know, spiritual leader? Like that's gotta be a weird thing.
I think it was much more of a head trip for Ray Capo, because he was the singer and he was the voice of the band. But it is a trip. It is a trip because here we are. We're following the spiritual path where we're not into fame. We're not into profit. We're not into, all these things that just kind of like all these accolades that just come naturally when you're in a band.
I mean, you guys were living, for anyone who doesn't know, you guys were living as monks in a temple at the beginning of the band.
Yeah, we were. We would wake up at 3:00 in the morning, take freezing cold showers, meditate for 2 hours, chant, sing songs, do rituals. And it was incredible. What a great time. I still look back at that time, like living like a monk, even though it was super austere. There's so much happiness in living a simple life of service and like self-study. It was really kind of beautiful time in my life, but it was
and then
so
a couple
weird.
Years after that, you're playing to 1 million people in Brazil with No Doubt.
Yeah. It was a trip. It was a trip. So I would, personally, what I would do is before we would play, we would play like these big shows, these festival shows in South America and all over Europe, and even in America, where you're playing to like 50,000 people. And it's so easy to get carried away that I'm the center of attention and I'm the object of worship. And look at all these people in the crowd. That's not my position. That's Krishna's position. You know what I mean? So I have to remember that somehow or other, Krishna has put me here. Now, how can I be of service? Like, how can I put out a message that could, possibly change people's life or uplift people? It's really interesting too, because we played this show, the Dynamo Festival. You ever heard of the Dynamo Festival? 100,000 people. It was literally 100,000 people. The stage is like 3 stories up. There's like a half of a quarter of a football field before the crowd even. It is so weird. It's like playing on a building, and it's people as far as the eye can see. It looks like there's 1 million people. Like, you can't even believe how many people 100,000 people is. And before we played that show, and I was one of the last people that was living as the monk in a temple when we played that show. And so I was about to go on stage, and I said, Krishna, somehow or other, you brought me here in front of 100,000 people. Like, let me just try to, put out some energy, that's really going to make a difference in somebody's life. I actually said a prayer like that before I went out on the stage. And then these days I do, Ray has his own podcast called Wisdom of the Sages. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't listened to it, but I've seen it.
Yeah, he does it every single day, 7 days a week, an hour-long podcast. But he started these discussion groups, and I'm one of the discussion group leaders. And it's just like, people come along that are new to Bhakti, and I kind of answer their questions. And, sometimes we'll talk about the Bhagavad Gita, or, I'll just find something to, some kind of Vedic story to talk about from the Ramayana or something. And one of the guys in my group, he said, it's so weird because I was just a punk rocker, and I went to your show at the Dynamo Festival, and I was just in the sea, in the crowd. I didn't even know who Shelter was. And I was just watching the band, and you guys were saying all this stuff on stage about Krishna and about non-materialism. And it just struck such a chord in me that it literally changed my whole life. And here I am, and I'm in your discussion group. So it was so weird, because when he said that, I remember actually saying like a prayer, like, I'm here, let me just like, do some good while I have the attention of 100,000 people. And somehow or other, here's this one kid in the crowd whose life was like changed by it. And I kind of, our paths kind of, intersected, decades later. And I thought, how cool.
And I'm sure you've heard thousands of stories like that over the years.
Yeah. Whenever I hear a story like that, I always think that I'm just paying it forward. Like, somehow by the mercy of my teachers, I have gurus and teachers in my life that literally spent years teaching me all this stuff for no money, just out of the kindness of their hearts. They kind of took me under their wing, and they tried to like show me a better way to live, and, spiritual principles that would be like a compass to guide my life. And I'm just so indebted to them. So whenever I do something small, like a fanzine or whatever, and I put in some like basic truths, and somebody reads and gets something out of it, and they tell me, oh, I got something out of it, I'm so indebted to you or whatever, I always think, this is just something my teachers taught me, and I'm just giving a fraction back. And I always just kind of pass on the indebtedness to the people that took their time to give it to me. And that's how, that's really how life is. It's just sort of a chain of people that are trying to uplift each other, and we just kind of like all pull each other up. And what else is there to do in life?
That's right. And
work 9 to 5 and make a bunch of money. Like, who cares?
For what? And for anybody who's listening, remember that you don't have to be on a stage in front of 100,000 people to do that. just saying the right thing at the right moment to the right person in line at Starbucks or something could change their life. I've had those experiences. I remember like there was a doorman at the building I used to work at that just said something to me once in like 2005 or something that totally just flipped a switch for me and helped me get over some really difficult problems that I was having. And I barely knew the guy, but just whatever he said to me that day really made a difference in my life. And you don't have to have an audience of 100,000 people to be that person.
Yeah, that was the weird thing, that somehow or other we did it through hardcore and punk. It was a trip. It was really kind of cool and strange experience.
You mentioned something. I was reading the interview that you did with Ray from Downset in War and Illusion, rereading that. And you guys talked about the line that they had in one of their songs, which was, there's a God and I bow and you will hate me for it. And, people listening to this now will think that, oh, well, everything that Porcell's saying is so positive and, helpful and uplifting. This is a great message, but it was not welcome at all. Like, when Shelter came out in like the, early 90s, people did not like it, did not want to hear it. And
people would boycott and picket our shows.
Sure. And they would call you all kinds of awful names and, you're brainwashing hardcore kids. And it was this dangerous cult and rah, rah, rah. It was like, it's so sad that this is one of the things that really frustrates me about, I guess I'll say alternative music in general is like, if you get up on stage and say a bunch of negative, hateful shit, not hateful as in like bigoted, but like negative, angry stuff, people will applaud you and tell you how cool you are. And like, you'll never get pushback for being a negative, angry person. But if you say something kind, it's corny. And if you try to be positive and promote a healthy lifestyle and way of thinking, you're brainwashing people. And it even back then, even as a kid, that just struck me as such a sad, disappointing thing to see.
It was funny. People would come to Shelter shows and they would be like, get the fuck out of punk rock. No gods, no masters. We don't want any spirituality or religion in the punk scene. How dare you say all this stuff? And I was just like, you want to know something? Fuck you, dude. Fuck you. Who are you to say what fucking punk rock is?
Right.
When I grew up in punk, it was just about, you got something to say. You've learned 3 chords on your guitar. You get up there and you say your piece. And it was all about just like, if you had something passionate to say, if there was something that, in your life that affected you, you get on stage and you say your piece. Just to say anything less than that, to say that you can't say what's in your heart in our scene, that's not progressive thinking. That's not open-mindedness. That's fascism.
It's
know what I
dogma.
mean? It is. It's just as dogmatic as they said that we were dogmatic. And
exactly. It's like the punk script that you have to follow. And it's especially frustrating knowing how much of that message could help people, that you guys got so much pushback for it.
Especially when we would be in Europe and there'd be like some crusty punk dude with like a Marlboro cigarette hanging out of his mouth and like a 40. And, he's trying to tell me that, get the fuck out of punk rock. I don't like the way you live.
Right.
What I mean? I just found it like, really ironic. Punk rock was supposed to be about freedom of expression. That was like the number one thing. And who's some guy with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, drunk off his ass, telling me what I can and can't say? Especially since I was around way before that freaking dude was around. So it used to really piss me off that people would kind of like say, this is our club. If you don't follow our rules, then you're kicked out of our club. Motherfucker, this is my club. You know what I mean? It's my club too. And if I have something to say, that it's not even like I'm saying racist things or, something that's like hateful
hurtful
things towards another person. I'm saying good things. Like, I think the real change came later on when people sort of read the lyrics and when they saw like, Ray's lyrics, and there would be like, I actually agree with this. I think a lot of people, they can get behind that message of anti-materialism and anti-consumerism. And they sort of, have felt that in their own life, that when they lean into that, they feel empty and hollow. I think people have that experience themselves. And so it was weird in the beginning, but it sort of leveled out after a few years, at least by the time Mantra came out.
Right.
There wasn't any of that stuff.
Yeah. Then you guys were major label sellouts.
Yeah, exactly. There's always going to be someone to complain about what you're doing.
I think a lot of it is that people don't like being confronted with the truth. And, the things that you guys were talking about were the truth, which is like, we all know that we're probably more materialistic than we should be. We all know that we're, envious or whatever. Like, everyone is aware of our shortcomings, like in your heart, and it doesn't, I guess, depending on who you are, you don't like hearing the truth because, you see a reflection in the mirror of what is inside your heart and you don't like it. And, you can respond to that by attacking the messenger, or you can respond to it by saying, hey, thank you for, reminding me that that's something I need to work on. And unfortunately, most people respond to it by attacking the messenger.
That's so true. It really became polarizing in the beginning, even for youth today. Like, can you imagine going into CBGBs where everybody's fucked up on like really hard drugs?
No. And you're being a bunch of like clean cut kids from fucking Connecticut and Westchester going into the belly of the beast and, with fucking all those characters and telling them to put down the 40. No, I can't fucking imagine that.
Yeah, it was. I think it's because there's some truth to it. It really hurts. It really hurts people. And they they respond with violence. Like, it's so confronting to them because they realize I'm just a drunken, stupid, punk. Here I am. I'm smoking angel dust. It's not good for me. Anybody that's smoking angel dust, they know.
Although at the same time, from their perspective, if I was in their shoes and I had gone through what a lot of those people had gone through, I'd probably be pissed off too. I'd probably be like, why don't you go the fuck back to Westchester instead of telling me how to live?
Unfortunately, it wasn't that nice. It's like, I'm going to fucking punch you in the face and smash a pool stick over your head.
Right.
There was a lot of that stuff.
So I can understand, from their perspective, I can understand how they might not, love, especially you guys being, to be fair, you guys were deliberately confrontational too, in a way that Shelter was not.
Yeah, we were, for sure. We were young kids on a mission. And it really was like that, even for me, like, when I'm studying all this stuff and I understand that there is a sort of a mark that I'm shooting for. And, you don't always live up to that. And sometimes when somebody shines a light on that and you realize that it's like confronting to you, and you either have two ways to deal with it. You can get mad, or you can really just kind of like introspect and think, man, I got to change my life. So it's a journey. We're all on a journey. Enlightenment doesn't come overnight. It comes step by step by step by step. And you really just have to be kind of like easy and, gentle and encouraging to people. Sometimes when you do it in a way where you're fault finding people so hard, it's so funny because when you fault find people, even if they take it to heart, it's almost like, I'm a piece of shit. You know what I mean? Like,
right. No.
You're left dejected. And I tell you, there's been great people in my life, great mentors in my life, and teachers and gurus. When I was like a punk rock kid trying to get into all this stuff, and, I was a mess and I had a big ego and I was filled with bad qualities. These really super spiritually evolved teachers that I came across, they wouldn't fault find in me. They would find the little bit of good in me and they would magnify that good, and they would fan that spark of good, and they would encourage me in that direction. And then I'm encouraged. You know what I mean? Like, then I'm hopeful. Then I'm like, yeah, I can do this. I want to move forward in life. When you're just constantly nagging on people of what they're doing wrong, it's the opposite. It's discouraging. So in my younger days, if I did that to anybody, I sincerely apologize. But it's all a learning process.
Yeah. Well, the last question I have for you is
I'm the singer of Project X that sang Straight Edge Revenge.
That's
for
right.
God's sake.
The last question I have is a pretty heavy one, and I apologize for throwing this on you, but I will do it anyway because I want to know. I'm hoping you can help me. So as I get older now in my 40s, I remember reading in War and Illusion and other things, the idea of that the body is temporary and that there's the cycle of birth, old age, sickness, and death. But, when you're 15, it's hard to internalize that. It's hard to really feel that. But now that I'm older, it's clear, as you said, I can see myself changing bodies. I can tell that I'm not as young as I used to be. And I can see the end, hopefully not anytime soon, but I can see it. Like, I'm having to kind of come to terms with the fact that I'm going to die, and that's a thing. That sickness and death is going to come for me like it does for everybody else. And to be honest, I'm having a hard time with it. And I wonder if you have anything what would you tell me about that?
Well, when I've been to India many, many, many times. And sometimes you'll see these sadhus, these wandering holy men. And they will actually walk around they'll go to a crematorium and they'll get a human skull. And they will walk around with a human skull in their hands all day long for years. And that skull is a reminder to them that we're not going to be here forever. Like, I'm going to be this skull. Like, one day, it could be tomorrow. We don't, usually when we think of death, we think 20, 30 years. No.
Could be 5 minutes from now.
Yeah, it could be next week. You could get in a car crash so easily these days. I know, especially from the punk scene, I know so many people that have died young and untimely, and have, friends that, died young. Even Alex Brown from Gorilla Biscuits, like, who saw that coming? It was, it's so crazy to think. This is what I'll have to say to comfort you. And it's an analogy from the Vedas. If you're walking through the woods and it's getting dark, and you can't really, you can kind of make out shapes, but the sun is going down, you can't really see too well. And you see a long thing in your path, and you think it's a snake. And you're like, oh my God, it's a snake. The snake is going to bite me. And you're filled with fear. And you look at that snake and you think, oh my God, it could bite me. It could kill me. I could die out here in the forest. And you're feeling real fear. But then when you get a little bit closer, you understand it's not a snake at all. It's a rope. So I was feeling real fear, but the whole time I was perfectly safe. I was in absolutely no danger at all. Because I misidentified a rope as a snake, I was filled with fear. So that is the exact situation of the spirit soul. You're not the body. You're actually an eternal spiritual being that's temporarily encased in this body, just like we go in a car and we drive in a car, or, the Bhagavad Gita says, just like you wear clothes, and then when your clothes wear out, you get new clothes, you put on new clothes. The body is like that. It's like an external covering to the eternal spirit soul. But because we've misidentified the body to be the self, when the body eventually breaks down and stops working, we're filled with anxiety and fear for absolutely no reason. You are perfectly 100% safe. Just like the whole second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, verse after verse after verse. You're the eternal spirit soul. You're not the body. The body dies, but you don't die. The soul can't be cut to pieces. The soul can't be withered by the wind. The soul can't be destroyed by any weapon. Like verse after verse after verse. That's literally the first teachings of the Bhagavad Gita when Krishna starts to instruct Arjuna in the second chapter. That's his first teaching. You're not the body. You're the eternal spirit soul that's inside of the body. And when you truly understand that, and when you have that deep realization, death isn't scary anymore. There's a great story about George Harrison. You ever heard about how George Harrison died?
No.
No one really knows his story because nobody even knew George Harrison was sick because he was such a private person. But there was a Krishna devotee that was there when he died. He requested this Krishna devotee to basically help him exit his body because he had cancer and he was dying. And so George Harrison asked them to actually chant the Maha Mantra. They were chanting Hare Krishna when George Harrison was leaving his body. And the doctor was constantly checking his vital statistics. And the doctor was checking him, and he turned to the people that were there and he said, "This is it. His vital signs are plummeting. You know, he's gonna die any minute now. If you have anything that you want to say to him, say it right now." And so this Krishna devotee walked up to George Harrison and he said, "George, do you realize this is it? This is the time of death. Like, you are exiting your body right now." And he said that George Harrison was completely lucid. And he said, "Yes, I understand. This is, I'm going to be leaving my body right now." And he said, "Are you scared?" George Harrison looked at him and he said, "I have absolutely no fear. Please continue chanting." And then they went back, they sat down at the harmonium and, you know, they started chanting Hare Krishna. And that's how George Harrison left his body. So that's not even somebody who's like this great guru and a, you know, guy sitting on lotus posture on the top of the mountain. This is George Harrison. He was at Beatles. He was just, you know, a musician, but he reached a state of enlightenment by the end of his life where death wasn't scary for him anymore. He had this spiritual realization that he wasn't the body and that he was perfectly safe. And so we just have to practice that. We just have to work on developing that. And
there's a part of me that I can feel clinging to my body that I'm like, oh, well, maybe they'll invent something that'll help me live longer, and maybe this and maybe that. And maybe that will happen. And if it does, that's cool. But I know that clinging to the body is ultimately futile.
You know, it's funny because in the Yoga Sutras, there's miseries of life. There's these things called the kleshas, these things that cause anxiety in life. And one of them is clinging to life. Because, you know, you can imagine like someone sticks a gun in your face and you're clinging to life because you think I'm being put out of existence. And so that's one of like the miseries of, you know, the causes of anxiety in life that's unnecessary. I'll tell you another story. Did you ever hear that Shelter was on tour with Earth Crisis and we got in that horrific car accident?
Yeah, I remember that. That was in Washington, right?
It was between Salt Lake City and Denver in the Rocky Mountains.
Oh, that's
somewhere.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
And we were in a van with a trailer. A van had a cap on it. We had a loft built in the back. I was sleeping like this with my head towards the back of the van. Ray Kappa was right next to me with his head towards the front of the van. And we were in the middle of nowhere in the mountains. Picture this. Our driver falls asleep at the wheel and we careen over the guardrail, and in midair, we plummet 150 feet off of a cliff and smash in this ravine at the bottom of a mountain. Our whole van was smashed to pieces. Everybody in the whole van was knocked unconscious except for me and except for this 19-year-old kid that I met at the temple that begged me to come on tour with him. So I kind of like personally took him. And he was sitting and we built another loft that was kind of like above the driver's seat where the cap was. We kind of put a plank there and you could sleep up there. And he was up there and I couldn't see him. But he was screaming, "Paramananda!" You know, my Christian name is Paramananda. "Paramananda! I can't feel my legs. I'm bleeding. I'm going to die. Please help me. Please help me. And like my heart is just like jumping out of my chest, and Ray's right next to me. And I could see his face, and he was like unconscious. And his whole side of his face was just black and blue. We had a harmonium, one of those things that you chant with, the little pump piano.
Yeah.
It flew out from the back and it smashed him in one side of his face. So he looked like that guy from Batman.
Yeah.
His face is destroyed. And I was shaking him, and I was going, Raghunath, wake up. Raghunath, wake up. And I was shaking him. I was shaking him like really hard. And he wasn't waking up. I was like, oh my God, Ray Capo, my childhood friend, my best friend, is dead. Everybody else must be dead because I can't hear anybody else talking. And our roadie, this young kid that I brought on tour, is going to die any second. He's literally screaming bloody murder. I'm going to die. Somebody please help me. Paramananda, are you there? Please help me. And so his name was Will. So I said, Will, I'm going to go get some help. And the van was on his side, and we had the plastic top of the van, and it was kind of cracked. I was really, really hurt. I wasn't kind of sure how hurt I was, but I managed to sort of like crack a piece of the plastic off, and I kind of rolled out of the van, and it was outside. And I don't know how I got to my feet, but somehow I got to my feet, and I saw the cliff, and I started running towards the cliff. I mean, this was like it would be hard to even climb this cliff. And I got about 4 feet. And as soon as I got to my feet and I took my first step, I was in such intense pain that I started running, and I took like 4 steps, and I flipped and I fell right on my back. And I was in so much intense pain. Like, let me tell you, I've broken my leg. I've broken my nose like 4 times. I've been in fights. I've been hit I've been hit over the head with a bottle. Like I've been in pain before. But this was like a pain that I never felt in my life. Like, first of all, my hand was cut open really bad. And so I had blood all over me. I was wearing a white t-shirt and boxers, and my front of my shirt, I could look down. It's just filled with blood. It was from my hand, but I thought it was from my head because I thought I cracked my head open because there was so much blood. And I broke 6 ribs in my back right next to my spine. And I tell you, if you break a rib that's like right here in the front, it's so painful. Can you imagine breaking 6 ribs right next to your spine?
Yeah.
Dude, with every breath, there's pain. And so I'm on my back. We're in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of the night, and it's desert climate. So it's really hot during the day, but at night it's freaking freezing. And I'm in a pair of shorts and t-shirts, so I'm freezing. And I can still hear my friend in the van, Paramananda, I'm gonna die. Please help me. I can't feel my legs. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm just thinking, everybody's dead. My head must be cracked open because there's so much blood all over me. A roadie's going to die. I'm not going to make it through the night. And it was so cold that my body was like going into convulsions. And I was in so much pain that I was practically blacking out like at every second. But it was this sheer will to live where I was just like, every time I would start to black out, I'd be like, no, if I black out, I'm going to die. And so I would like force myself back into consciousness, even though I was in so much pain. And that was happening like every 10 seconds. It was hellish, dude. It was like, really like, this is it. Like, you talk about death, and now here it is. It's upon me. And so what do? I have absolutely no shelter left in the world whatsoever but Krishna. And I just started praying, Krishna, please help me. Please save me. If this is my time to go, please like comfort me, because I'm not ready for this. Like I'm like, freaking out. I'm not ready for this. I'm filled with fear. Krishna, please be with me. Please help me. Please, see me through this. If I'm going to die, please help me through this. And I just started chanting. And I was going, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And I'm practically yelling it because I'm just in so much distress. And I tell you, when you really sincerely petition Krishna from your heart in an hour of need like that, Krishna reaches through space and time. He comes and he helps you. And it was like magic that somehow or other, it was like a realization got dropped out of the sky in my mind. You want to hear what the realization that came to me? It just popped into my mind. To this day, I'm convinced it was like a gift from Krishna. You're going through this. Here's a little knowledge. I had this realization that if you're sitting in a movie theater and you're watching a movie, like say you're watching Star Wars, and the hero of the movie, Luke Skywalker, is going through all these trials and tribulations. Now, if it's a really good movie like Star Wars and they do really good character development, you're sitting in the audience, but you start to identify with the hero of the movie, and the things that he feels, you feel. Mm-hmm. Like when he's courageously fighting in a battle, you feel that. And that's what makes a movie so good. You know, you're kind of identifying and you're feeling what the hero of the movie is feeling. And that's the beauty of a movie. So I was thinking of just as that happens when you watch a movie, I'm identifying with this body.
Watching the cosmic movie of life, like Yogananda says.
Exactly. That's the exact realization that I had, that this life is almost like a movie that you're watching, and things are going around you, and matter is moving around you, and you're identifying with this character almost like you're playing a video game in a virtual reality. It's not you. You're moving it, but it's not you, and it seems to be you, and you're kind of plugged into this, this body that's made out of inanimate matter. But I was thinking, just as like you identify with the character of the movie, when he's going through all this stuff, you're feeling fear, and he's fighting, and you're feeling, fear. But the whole time you're sitting in your chair and you're perfectly safe. So I was thinking, I don't quite understand it right now, but somehow or other, I'm safe. Like my body may be broken, but I'm not broken. I'm a spirit soul. I'm completely separate from the body. I'm not going through this. Somehow or other, I'm completely safe. I'm sitting in the chair in the movie theater. I'm just watching a movie. And I was so comforted by that. I was like incredibly, incredibly, incredibly comforted by that. And then I started like kind of chanting softly. We ended up all surviving. Miraculously, like the paramedics came and they like basically rescued us and took us to the hospital, and they
was the roadie seriously hurt, like permanently or anything?
You want to know what's so weird? I didn't see that. The roadie had to be helicoptered out to some hospital, I think in Salt Lake, where they immediately took him into surgery right off the helicopter. And he had the same break in his neck as Christopher Reeves. Remember the actor that played Superman that was paralyzed? Mm-hmm. He had the exact same break in his neck. It was the exact same vertebrae, and it was crushed. And the doctors couldn't believe it. They operated on him. They were convinced he was going to be paralyzed and he could walk. They thought it was kind of like a miracle. Hmm. And I didn't see him. I called him a few times after that to see how he was doing, but we kind of like lost touch. And just a couple of years ago, I saw him right outside of Generation Records in New York City. I don't know if you've ever been there. It's a great record store. I was coming out of the record store and he was walking down the street. And I was like, and he was walking with a cane. And I was like, oh my God, Will, what is up? Like, how are you doing? And I saw him with the cane and I was like, man, you're still walking with a cane decades later. I was like, man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And he said, sorry. He said, are you kidding me? Every day I wake up and I thank Krishna, and I feel deep gratitude for Krishna for letting me live through that. And every day is like a new day to me, because I was so on the brink of death, and somehow or other I miraculously lived, and that I can walk. I don't care about walking with this cane. He's like, I have nothing but gratitude for walking with a cane and waking up every morning and being alive. And I thank Krishna for it every single morning. And I was like, what a great attitude. You know, you could be bitter about the whole thing. This sucks. I got to walk with a cane. Or you could have nothing but appreciation and gratitude. I thought, and I was so like impressed with him. And yeah, it was a crazy story, but somehow or other, don't worry about it, man. Well, even at the time of death, you're safe. That snake is a rope, dude.
I'm working on it. It's going to be a tough one for me, but I will keep working on it. And hopefully by the time that day comes, I'll have internalized that. So I appreciate the conversation. I'm very grateful for all the ideas that you've put out there into the world over the years. It's really helped me, become the person I am in the good ways. I'm sure there's thousands of other people across the world that would say the same thing. Always happy to help out with anything I can. We'll be on the lookout for your new band, for the new Shelter record. And I wish you well with everything else you have going on.
All right, Finn. Thank you so much for having me on.
Take care. I'll talk to you later.
All right, brother. Take care.
Bye.